The story begins in a military system built on segregation, doubt, and institutional prejudice. The 761st Tank Battalion is not created because the Army believes African American soldiers deserve a place in armored warfare. It is created because political pressure forces the War Department to make a concession during the build-up to World War II. The Army forms the unit reluctantly, treating it as a controlled experiment rather than a fighting force. From the moment the battalion is activated at Camp Claiborne, every element of its existence reflects mistrust. African American soldiers are restricted to labor units and service roles by doctrine that labels them intellectually unfit for complex combat tasks. Armored warfare represents the peak of battlefield responsibility, requiring initiative, coordination, and independent judgment, and the Army leadership is convinced these men cannot meet those demands. The 761st is therefore placed under a microscope. Their training is extended far beyond the standards applied to white units. While white tank battalions complete training and deploy overseas in under a year, the Black Panthers remain stateside for more than 900 days. The men understand exactly what this means. Every mistake is ammunition for those who expect them to fail. Every success is quietly dismissed or ignored. Their equipment is standard, but their mission is not. They are training not only to fight the Wehrmacht, but to disprove the deeply rooted racial assumptions of their own chain of command. Their instructors drill them relentlessly in gunnery, maneuver warfare, and combined arms tactics, turning them into one of the most technically proficient tank units on American soil. Yet the Army continues to block their deployment, insisting they are not ready. This prolonged delay sharpens their resolve. The battalion's culture becomes defined by discipline, aggression, and a fierce internal pressure to exceed every requirement placed on them. The men embrace a bitter truth. Failure will not simply cost lives, it will reinforce a doctrine that has denied them dignity. Their motivation becomes deeply personal. Each day of training is a silent defiance of a country that allows them to serve but refuses to trust them. General George S. Patton, one of the most demanding commanders in the Allied forces, enters the story not as a champion of equality, but as a pragmatist, desperate for armored strength. By October 1944, his Third Army is bleeding across France. He needs tanks to maintain momentum. When he stands before the 761st on that cold, muddy field, he carries with him the same doubts held by the Army establishment. His speech is brutal, indifferent, and transactional. He tells them he does not care about their color as long as they kill Germans. It is not encouragement. It is a challenge. In that moment, the battalion recognizes what the war will demand of them. They are being sent into combat not with the confidence of their leaders, but with a single conditional expectation: prove yourselves or be forgotten. What Patton does not understand is that the men before him have been preparing for this moment for years. They do not need his faith. They need only the opportunity to fight. A simple truth forming beneath the surface. The Army believes it is sending an untested experiment into battle. The men of the 761st know they are stepping into history with something far more powerful than steel and gasoline. They carry a determination forged by exclusion, humiliation, and relentless training, and they intend to prove in combat what America has refused to see in peace. The 761st Tank Battalion enters combat in November 1944, and the transition from theory to reality is immediate and brutal. The battalion is attached to the 26th Infantry Division and ordered into the assault on Morville-les-Vic, a stone-built village that has already repulsed a previous American attack. For the Black Panthers, this is not simply a first mission. It is the moment the Army's doubts collide with the truth of their preparation. The approach to the town unfolds under relentless rain. The fields turn to deep mud that clings to the tracks of the Sherman tanks and threatens to immobilize them before they reach the enemy. As the battalion advances, the infantry support becomes pinned down by a precise, sustained mortar barrage. The tankers suddenly find themselves alone. This is the scenario every armored crew fears: tanks entering narrow streets without foot soldiers to clear threats and identify ambushes. Anti-tank guns, Panzerfaust teams, and machine gun nests turn city blocks into killing grounds. Any hesitation can turn an armored vehicle into a steel coffin. The 761st does not hesitate. Company B pushes forward without infantry, forcing their Shermans into the constricting streets where danger exists in every doorway and window. Their gunners switch from armor-piercing rounds to high-explosive shells, firing directly into houses, stone walls, and cellar openings. Instead of waiting for infantry, they use their main guns as assault artillery, collapsing German strongpoints room by room. This level of aggression defies the expectations of both the army hierarchy and the Wehrmacht. The tankers maneuver with practiced confidence despite the chaos, relying on their extended training and their internal discipline to maintain momentum. Their first casualties occur quickly. Private Clifford Adams is killed by machine gun fire while exposed in his turret, a reminder that the battle will demand sacrifice. A Sherman is destroyed by a concealed anti-tank gun, but the column does not break. The crews continue to push into the village center, trading steel and fire at point-blank range. When night falls, Morville-les-Vic, previously untaken, is secured. The battalion has achieved its first objective through unsupported armored assault, a feat that contradicts the Army's own expectations for an inexperienced unit. The psychological fallout is even more revealing. When the surviving German defenders are processed, the tankers do not encounter hardened soldiers accepting defeat. They encounter men gripped by fear. Years of Nazi racial propaganda have conditioned German troops to believe that African American soldiers are savages who will commit atrocities. The Wehrmacht's indoctrination creates a bizarre, tragic reaction. Some prisoners are too terrified to surrender, and one soldier, rather than be captured by black Americans, slashes his throat with a straight razor. Their fear is not rooted in the tactical realities of the battlefield, but in the poisonous ideology they were taught to believe. Yet German intelligence fails to understand what is actually happening. Their frontline reports do not acknowledge the battalion's racial composition. They describe only aggressive, relentless American tank crews operating Sherman tanks with unexpected ferocity. They see the machine, not the men. They identify tactical momentum, not the cultural and emotional factors driving it. The 761st becomes invisible within the American Army and indistinguishable within the German analysis. Their performance is judged solely by their results, and their results are impossible to ignore. These first engagements establish a pattern that will define the next 6 months. When confronted with entrenched defenses, the battalion does not halt and request reinforcements. It assaults. When faced with obstacles, it overwhelms. When pinned down, it pushes forward instead of pulling back. The men are not driven by blind recklessness, but by a disciplined refusal to be labeled inferior. Each street they clear, each roadblock they dismantle, and each defensive line they rupture is an act of defiance against both the Wehrmacht and the prejudices embedded within their own military structure. The ends with the realization that the 761st's entry into the war is not a tentative experiment. It is an explosion of capability, violent, precise, and undeniable. Their first victory announces that the battalion is not merely ready for combat, it is engineered for aggression, shaped by the weight of expectation, and motivated by a purpose deeper than any other armored unit in Patton's Third Army. The war has finally given them a chance to fight, and they intend to make the battlefield prove what their country refused to believe. The transformation of the 761st Tank Battalion from a doubted experiment into a relentless combat force reaches its emotional and symbolic apex through one man, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. His story becomes the embodiment of the battalion's willpower, its internal culture, and its refusal to accept the limitations imposed upon it by the American military. What unfolds between November 16th and November 19th, 1944, is a sustained act of defiance that challenges both the boundaries of human endurance and the Army's deepest racial assumptions. On November 16th, during an advance near the town of Giebling, Rivers' Sherman tank rolls over a German Teller mine. The blast lifts the 30-ton vehicle into the air before slamming it back onto the mud. Inside the turret, the crew is thrown violently against steel bulkheads. Amid the chaos, Rivers feels a sharp, searing impact. When he looks down, he sees his right leg torn open from knee to ankle, the muscle split to the bone, blood pooling on the turret floor. Medics reach him and immediately recognize the severity of the wound. It is a textbook million-dollar wound, the kind that guarantees evacuation, treatment, and permanent removal from the battlefield. Morphine is offered, evacuation is ordered, and the path to safety is clear. Rivers rejects all of it. He refuses morphine, knowing it would dull his senses. He refuses evacuation, knowing it would remove him from his men. His commander, Captain David Williams, confronts him with a direct order to withdraw to medical care. Rivers, pale from blood loss, yet unshaken, answers with the single sentence that becomes his legacy: "This is one order I'll ever disobey." The decision is irrational by medical standards and illogical by tactical reasoning, but it is entirely consistent with the unspoken contract that defines the 761st Tank Battalion. To Rivers, leaving the field is not simply abandoning his tank or the fight. It is validating the belief held by officers, doctrines, and institutions that black soldiers will break under pressure. The wound becomes a test of identity rather than a test of pain. As night falls, Rivers lies in the cold, his legs swelling, gangrene beginning to set in, the stench of infection noticeable even to his crew. He spends the night in silence, refusing painkillers, forcing himself to remain alert. By dawn on November 17th, he cannot walk. Two men lift him into the turret of a replacement Sherman, and he resumes command. His crew watches him work the radios, call targets, and direct movement as if nothing has changed, even as fever blurs his vision and the infection spreads through his bloodstream. The battalion advances through mud, rain, and fire, and Rivers remains at the point of the formation, unwilling to relinquish the role of leading his platoon. The crisis escalates on November 19th during the assault on Burgultrauf. The German defenders have pre-sighted the terrain with anti-tank guns, and Company A becomes pinned. Immobile and exposed, the tanks face destruction. From his turret, Rivers notices the hidden muzzle flashes of the German guns, details the rest of the formation cannot see. He radios his commander with a calm, decisive message: "I see them, we'll fight them." He orders his driver forward, deliberately exposing his tank to the enemy. In doing so, he turns himself into the most visible and most vulnerable target on the battlefield. His action draws German fire away from the other tanks, allowing the company to withdraw, reorganize, and survive. From a nearby Sherman, Staff Sergeant Floyd Dade watches the German gunners shift their focus entirely onto Rivers. The first round rocks the tank. The second round is perfect. An 88mm shell punches through the turret, killing Rivers instantly. The aftermath reveals the significance of his final act. The rest of Company A, energized by the sacrifice they have just witnessed, launches a counterattack and destroys the German positions. The battalion survives because one man refuses to step away, refuses to be evacuated, and refuses to allow his injury to become a justification for the prejudice that framed the battalion's creation. Rivers' death does not become an isolated tale of bravery. Instead, it becomes a symbol of the battalion's collective ethos. His refusal mirrors that of Sergeant Roy King, who rejects evacuation after being hit by a Panzerfaust 10 days earlier and dies in combat on the same day as Rivers. It mirrors the actions of Sergeant Warren G. Cherry, who repeatedly dismounts under fire to scout positions on foot. It mirrors the behavior of tank crews who continue fighting from turretless hulls or command assaults on foot after losing their vehicles. In the larger narrative of the 761st, Rivers becomes the human face of a structural pattern, a battalion so determined to disprove the racist doctrine that created it that it redefines endurance itself. German tactical reports, still oblivious to the unit's racial composition, describe the ferocity of the American tankers, but never grasp the deeper motivation behind their relentless aggression. They record the effects but miss the cause. The Wehrmacht sees bravery. They do not understand that each act of bravery is aimed at an enemy behind the American lines as well. Rivers' sacrifice becoming both a tactical rescue and a symbolic revelation. His death encapsulates the war the Black Panthers are truly fighting, not for territory, not for a general's approval, but for the right to be seen as soldiers equal to any other. His last decision on the battlefield becomes the proof the army never expected, and the legacy the 761st carries forward through the remaining months of the war. The death of Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers does not halt the momentum of the 761st Tank Battalion. Instead, it hardens the unit into an instrument of continuous, unbroken assault. With Rivers gone, the battalion carries forward the example he set. Never stop, never withdraw. Never allow the Germans or the American command structure to see hesitation. What follows after Bergelshof is not a series of independent skirmishes, but a single, grueling, 183-day offensive across France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria. The battalion becomes a moving spearhead of Patton's Third Army, a formation defined by pressure, endurance, and an aggression that German units repeatedly misunderstand until it is too late. The next major test comes in early January 1945, during the Battle of the Bulge, when the 761st is tasked with taking the fortified crossroads town of Tillet. Temperatures drop below zero, freezing the mud of the Ardennes into jagged ice. Snow blinds visibility, engine oil thickens, and steel becomes brittle. The conditions favor the defenders, but the Black Panthers receive no allowance for weather, fatigue, or the attrition they have already suffered. They are ordered forward because Patton's armored divisions are stretched thin, and the bulge created by the German offensive must be sealed at all costs. For 48 hours, the battalion engages in brutal, close-range tank combat. German Panther tanks, dug into elevated, concealed positions, fire with lethal accuracy. Company commanders lose vehicles one by one, yet the 761st continues to advance, supported by infantry that grows increasingly dependent on the tankers' aggressiveness. Captain Charles "Pop" Gates leads assaults on foot after his own tank is destroyed, directing fire under conditions where survival depends on seconds and inches. Lieutenant Moses Dade loses the entire turret of his Sherman to a direct hit but survives with his crew. Instead of withdrawing, he climbs back into the turretless hull and continues fighting using only the hull-mounted .30 caliber machine gun. These acts are not exceptions within the battalion, they are patterns. The 761st treats every setback as a temporary inconvenience. A disabled tank becomes an opportunity to change tactics. A lost commander becomes a rallying point. A fortified town becomes a problem that firepower, persistence, and maneuver will eventually overwhelm. When Tillet finally falls, it is not taken by a fresh, rested, armored division, but by tankers who have been fighting consecutive engagements for nearly 2 months. Their victory breaks the defensive hold of the German 6th SS Mountain Division, a seasoned formation that German command believed would halt Patton's advance. It does not. The SS unit withdraws. Shaken by the intensity of a battalion it still does not realize is composed almost entirely of black soldiers. By March 1945, the battalion arrives at one of the most symbolic defensive barriers in Europe, the Siegfried Line. The West Wall, as German doctrine calls it, is designed to be impenetrable, a vast network of bunkers, trenches, dragon's teeth, and anti-tank positions, intended to bleed Allied forces dry. Many commanders expect the 761st to pause, consolidate, and wait for infantry, engineers, or artillery. The Black Panthers do not pause. They probe, bypass, and overwhelm, applying the same aggressive momentum they displayed in France and Belgium. They learn quickly that the Siegfried Line can be fractured by speed, shock, and relentless forward movement. They attack from unexpected angles, using terrain, suppressive fire, and the mechanical reliability of their Shermans to break German defensive sequencing. The battalion's approach becomes a signature pattern. Avoid the strongest point, assault the weakest link, push through, and let the follow-on units expand the breach. Their actions contribute directly to the collapse of organized German resistance west of the Rhine. Yet throughout this period, German tactical reports stubbornly continue to miss the truth. They describe American armor as numerically overwhelming, aggressively handled, and difficult to repel. They note the high volume of fire the battalion delivers and the rapid recovery from losses. They never identify the unit as segregated or racially distinct. Their ideology blinds them to one of the war's most significant tactical developments: the existence of an all-black armored unit operating with exceptional effectiveness. As the German defenses crumble, the battalion pushes into southern Germany. Their operations become a relentless pursuit. Roads once defended by anti-tank guns become evacuation routes for German troops fleeing the American advance. Towns surrender quickly or collapse under combined American pressure. On the 26th of April, 1945, the battalion crosses the Rhine, continuing eastward until, on May 4th, they make contact with the 1st Ukrainian front of the Soviet Army at the Elbe River. Along the way, they liberate the Gunskirchen concentration camp, discovering emaciated prisoners and confronting the genocidal brutality of the regime they have spent months destroying. All of this occurs without operational pause. The battalion has no rotation, no relief, no sustained period of rest. The men eat when they can, sleep when they can, and fight constantly. The attrition is staggering. 71 Sherman tanks lost, hundreds of wounded or killed, ammunition expended at a rate that strains supply lines. Yet, the battalion continues forward, driven by a shared belief that their performance is more than military, it is historical. Every mile they advance is a mile further from the prejudice that once defined them. Every German position they take is another argument against the doctrine that tried to keep them out of combat. The recognition that the 761st has become not merely a tank battalion, but a phenomenon. Their relentless pace reshapes battlefield expectations. Their presence alters tactical planning. Their performance silences every doubt that once surrounded them. By the time they reach the Elbe, they have crossed multiple countries, shattered elite German formations, and proven through endurance, aggression, and sacrifice that they are among the most effective armored units the U.S. Army has fielded. Their 183-day march has turned Patton's reluctant gamble into a decisive force and has set in motion consequences far beyond the battlefield. By May 1945, the guns fall silent across Europe, but the impact of the 761st Tank Battalion is only beginning to echo through the institutions that once doubted them. Their 183-day combat record is not merely a ledger of victories and casualties. It is a sustained demolition of the U.S. Army's segregationist doctrine, one constructed over decades of flawed studies, racist assumptions, and bureaucratic resistance. The war ends, but the consequences of what the Black Panthers have proven now confront the very system that created them as an experiment. Before the battalion ever reached France, the 1925 Army War College report, an influential, deeply racist document, declared African Americans intellectually inferior, emotionally unstable, and unsuitable for combat roles requiring initiative. These ideas shaped training, assignments, promotions, and the entire structure of the segregated military. The 761st's creation in 1942 was tolerated only because political pressure made it unavoidable. Their deployment in 1944 was approved only because Patton needed tanks for his rapidly advancing Third Army. By 1945, this doctrine lies in ruins. The performance of the battalion provides undeniable, battlefield-tested evidence that explodes every foundational assumption of segregationist policy. These men who were once deemed incapable of commanding armored vehicles prove not only capable, but exceptional. They operate Shermans under conditions that would have broken many seasoned units. They demonstrate initiative while under fire. They show emotional resilience through bitter, relentless combat. Their casualty rate approaches 50%, yet their morale and cohesion remain intact. These facts cannot be ignored or minimized. And yet, when the war ends, the recognition they deserve does not follow them home. America is victorious abroad, but unchanged at home. The men of the 761st return to a segregated country that still refuses them entry into restaurants, hotels, and neighborhoods. The battalion that had helped to break the Nazi war machine is not celebrated in parades. Their actions are not integrated into official campaigns or history books. Their commander, Patton, praises their combat performance privately, but does not champion them publicly. The Army files their achievements away with bureaucratic coldness, refusing to confront what their success means for the future of military policy. The burden of remembrance falls on the men themselves. They form the 761st Tank Battalion and Allied Veterans Association, meeting annually to preserve their own story because no one else will. They lobby for recognition, petition Congress, record oral histories, and refuse to let their contributions disappear into archives. Their persistence reflects the same spirit that carried them through France and Belgium. If institutions will not give them respect, they will force the issue through their own efforts. Over time, the cracks in the Army's resistance widen. Commanders who once doubted them admit, sometimes grudgingly, that the battalion fought with exceptional courage, discipline, and effectiveness. Infantry units that fought beside them speak openly about their reliability and aggression. Slowly, the narrative shifts. By the 1,962nd, historians and veterans begin to cite the battalion as proof that segregation in the military was not only unfair, but strategically foolish. The turning point comes with recognition long overdue. In 1978, 33 years after the war, the Presidential Unit Citation is finally awarded to the 761st Tank Battalion. It is not merely a medal. It is a formal admission that the unit's combat record places it among the most effective armored battalions of World War II. 4 years later, in 1997, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers receives the Medal of Honor half a century after the battle in which he gave his life. These honors do not rewrite history. They correct the Army's refusal to acknowledge it. Yet the true legacy of the Black Panthers emerges in 1948, only 3 years after the war. President Harry S. Truman signs Executive Order 9981, abolishing racial segregation in the armed forces. The decision is not presented as a moral breakthrough. It is a military necessity. The performance of the 761st and other segregated units such as the Tuskegee Airmen demonstrates that talent, courage, and discipline know no racial boundaries. The Army cannot justify a system that wastes ability when the Cold War demands maximum readiness. The battlefield has exposed the doctrine of racial inferiority as not only immoral but strategically indefensible. The 761st Tank Battalion becomes a cornerstone in this transformation. Their actions across France, Belgium, and Germany provide the clearest possible answer to the question that racist doctrine claimed was settled. Can African American soldiers perform in the most demanding roles of modern warfare? The evidence lies not in theory but in 183 uninterrupted days of combat, days filled with shattered Panthers, breached fortifications, liberated civilians, and miles of German territory ground down under their tracks. The final meaning of their service transcends military history. It reveals a universal truth about human capability. Ideology can dictate expectations, but performance shatters those expectations the moment reality contradicts them. Nazi racial theorists declared black soldiers inferior. American segregationists agreed. The 761st disproved both on the same battlefield. In the end, the battalion fulfills a mission far larger than any objective Patton assigned them. They do not simply fight for the United States. They force the United States to confront what it claims to be. They take the motto painted on their tanks, "Come out fighting," and extend it beyond France, Belgium, and Germany. They come out fighting against prejudice, against doctrine, against the very limitations placed upon them by their own country. The recognition that the 761st Tank Battalion did more than make history. They reshaped it. They proved that courage and competence exist independently of race, and they pushed the U.S. military and eventually the nation toward the ideals it had long proclaimed but never practiced. Patton once told them he did not care about their color. Through 183 days of relentless combat, the Black Panthers made America finally learn to say the same and mean it. There are moments in history when the battlefield becomes more than a place of violence. It becomes a proving ground for ideas, an arena where belief, prejudice, and doctrine collide with the raw force of reality. The story of the 761st Tank Battalion is one of those moments. What happened between October 1944 and May 1945 was not simply a string of victories. It was an extended confrontation between ideology and performance, between what a society believes people are capable of and what those people decide to prove for themselves. The lessons that emerge from this story stretch far beyond World War II. They speak to leadership, resilience, identity, discrimination, and the extraordinary heights human beings reach when the world expects them to fail. The first lesson is about the power of expectation, specifically, the danger of low expectations. Before the 761st ever saw combat, the Army War College had already decided their limits. Segregationists had already written their ceiling. They were not supposed to command tanks. They were not supposed to handle complex weapon systems. They were not supposed to show initiative under fire. They were, according to doctrine, unfit for combat arms. When a system labels a group as inferior, that label becomes an invisible chain. It shapes assignments, training, promotions, even the chances someone gets to prove themselves. But the 761st story reveals a counterforce. When people are driven by the need to break an unjust expectation, they develop a strength that those who have never been underestimated cannot easily understand. The battalion's training, 929 consecutive days of drills, maneuvers, gunnery, maintenance, and tactical exercises, was not simply preparation. It was a struggle for identity. Every lesson they absorbed was a silent statement. We are capable. We are disciplined. We are ready. Their extended training, designed to delay them, ultimately forged them into one of the best prepared armored units in the U.S. Army. The lesson is clear. Sometimes the obstacles placed in your path become the very grindstone that sharpens your talent. What others intend as suppression can become transformation if you choose to endure. The second lesson lies in the meaning of leadership under oppression. The officers who led the battalion, both black and white, had to navigate two fronts. They commanded tanks and men in the field, but they also fought a subtler battle against a system that denied their legitimacy. Black officers in particular carried a dual burden, leading men in combat while constantly proving that their leadership should be recognized at all. Their authority was not assumed, it was earned daily. That pressure shaped a leadership style built on example, sacrifice, and constant vigilance. When a leader's every action is scrutinized, leadership becomes an act of defiance. From them we learn that real leadership is not a position granted. It is a position maintained through continuous integrity under unfair conditions. Nowhere is this lesson clearer than in the actions of Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. His refusal to accept evacuation after a catastrophic injury is often framed as reckless bravery, but it represents something deeper. A man who understood that leaving the fight would reinforce the very stereotype he had spent years confronting. He knew his presence mattered not only tactically but symbolically. Leadership, in its purest form, is the willingness to bear consequences that others should not have to bear. Rivers chose to stay because he understood what was at stake, not just for the battle at Bergelshof, but for the reputation of the battalion, the credibility of its soldiers, and the legacy of every black serviceman who would follow. His sacrifice offers another lesson. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the conquest of injustice with purpose. When Rivers exposed his tank to draw German fire, He was not motivated by a simple desire for heroism. He was driven by obligation to his men, to his unit, to the cause of proving that African American tankers belonged in the fight. The courage of the 761st was not impulsive, it was principled. It came from years of being told they were inferior, years of being denied opportunity, years of being trained harder and longer because people expected them to fail. They chose to answer prejudice, not with anger, but with performance so overwhelming it could not be denied. That is a form of courage that extends beyond war. Another powerful lesson emerges from the German reaction to the battalion. Nazi racial ideology preached black inferiority as absolute biological fact. The Wehrmacht expected African American soldiers to be cowardly, undisciplined, and militarily ineffective. Yet when confronted with the 761st, German troops experienced shock, confusion, and often terror. Their reports noted a new, highly aggressive American armored unit. They did not even realize they were fighting a segregated unit because their ideology made it impossible for them to see the truth. This blindness teaches a profound lesson. Ideology can make even intelligent people incapable of recognizing reality. Prejudice not only harms its victims, it cripples the judgment of those who hold it. The Germans' failure to understand the source of the battalion's ferocity is mirrored by the American command's initial refusal to acknowledge what the battalion accomplished. Even after the war, when the Black Panthers had fought more consecutive days than any other U.S. armored unit, their achievements were buried under bureaucratic indifference. It took 33 years for the Presidential Unit Citation to be awarded. This delay teaches another lesson. Institutions often take far longer to correct their prejudices than individuals do. Systems resist admitting that their assumptions were wrong, because doing so would expose the flaws in their foundations. The 761st forced the Army to confront those flaws, but the recognition came slowly, painfully, and only through relentless pressure from veterans themselves. A fourth lesson lies in the relationship between capability and opportunity. The battalion's performance proved decisively that talent is universal while access is not. The contradiction between their effectiveness and the discrimination they endured exposes the waste caused by segregation. How many potential officers, strategists, engineers, pilots, or commanders were denied their chance because of assumptions rooted in race? The story of the 761st demonstrates that the greatest losses created by discrimination are not moral, they are practical. A society that suppresses part of its talent suppresses its own potential. Victory in World War II required the U.S. military to face this truth. Executive Order 9981, which desegregated the armed forces, was not an act of generosity. It was an act of necessity born from the undeniable performance of black combat units. There is also an essential lesson about identity and purpose. The 761st did not fight solely to defeat Germany. They fought to redefine what it meant to be American. Their service forced the nation to confront the contradiction between democratic ideals and racist practices. They served a country that denied them equality. Yet they fought with a discipline and commitment that exposed the hypocrisy of those who doubted them. This contradiction offers a universal insight. Sometimes people fight not because their nation has earned their loyalty, but because they intend to shape their nation into something worthy of loyalty. The battalion's motto, "Come out fighting," was not only a battlefield creed, it was a philosophy for life in a divided society. The psychological resilience of the battalion provides yet another lesson. They marched, fought, and suffered without pause for 183 consecutive days. They lost tanks, leaders, and friends. They endured German fire, bitter weather, exhaustion, and the emotional burden of being judged constantly by an army waiting for their failure. Yet, they did not break. Their endurance demonstrates a principle often forgotten in modern discussions of resilience. Motivation born from injustice can be more powerful than motivation born from comfort. When people feel they must fight simply to claim their place in the world, their effort becomes relentless. Finally, the story of the 761st Tank Battalion teaches the most timeless lesson of all. Performance is the ultimate destroyer of prejudice. Racism is built on predictions. Predictions about capability, behavior, intelligence, and courage. When those predictions are shattered by measurable results, the ideology behind them collapses. The battalion did not argue, protest, or appeal for equality on paper. They demonstrated it with action. They fought elite German units, breached fortified lines, liberated prisoners, and covered more ground in continuous combat than any comparable unit. They showed that equality is not a theory. It is a reality waiting to be unleashed. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that the strongest rebuttal to bigotry is undeniable excellence. When a society is confronted with performance that contradicts its prejudices, it must either change or live openly with its hypocrisy. In time, even the U.S. Army could not maintain its segregationist doctrine. The battlefield had proven it wrong. The lesson that remains for us today is simple yet profound. Never allow someone else's limitations to become your identity. The 761st faced a world that defined them before they ever acted. They chose to redefine themselves through action so extraordinary that no doctrine, no report, no prejudice could survive it. They remind us that the fight for recognition is sometimes fought not in arguments but in achievements. And they show that when people oppressed by their own country choose to stand up, fight back, and excel, they do more than win battles, they change the country itself. The 761st Tank Battalion proved that courage, discipline, intelligence, and willpower do not belong to any race. They belong to those who decide, no matter the circumstance, to come out fighting. In the end, the story of the 761st Tank Battalion is not simply a chapter of World War II history. It is a reminder of what happens when human beings refuse to accept the limits imposed on them by fear, prejudice, or tradition. For 183 days, through mud, winter, fire, and doubt, the Black Panthers carved a path across Europe that no doctrine had predicted and no racist theory could explain. They were never meant to be there. They were never meant to succeed. Yet their success was so overwhelming that it forced two nations, Germany and the United States, to confront the falsehoods at the core of their beliefs. The German soldiers who faced them learned that propaganda collapses when reality arrives in a Sherman tank. The American commanders who once doubted them learned that capability cannot be confined by segregation, and the world learned that courage, discipline, and excellence do not belong to any one race. They belong to those who choose to rise when everything around them says they should stay down. The legacy of the 761st lives not only in medals or citations, many of which came far too late, but in the transformation they compelled. Their performance helped crack the intellectual foundation of segregation and pushed the U.S. to military toward a future that finally reflected the ideals it claimed to defend. They fought to liberate Europe, but in doing so, they also liberated a part of America from its own blindness. The Black Panthers did not set out to change history. They set out to prove they were soldiers. Instead, they proved something far greater: that when determination meets injustice, and when skill meets opportunity, the result is a force powerful enough to break armies, rewrite doctrine, and reshape a nation's understanding of itself. Their tanks have long fallen silent. Their motto has not come out fighting. Germany raced to adapt its radar. Britain raced to adapt its chaff. Germany took months. Britain took days. Germany created SN2. Britain cut longer strips. Germany modified antennas. Britain changed jamming frequencies. Germany refined filtering. Britain refined scattering behavior. This is the law of adaptation. Victory does not belong to the strongest. Victory belongs to the fastest learner. Window teaches us that evolution is not optional. It is oxygen. Germany's technological confidence was immense. It believed the Kammhuber line was unbreakable. It believed radar superiority guaranteed survival. It believed its scientists were the best in the world. And in many ways, they were. But confidence becomes fatal when it turns into complacency. No one in the Luftwaffe imagined that radar itself could be turned against them. No one questioned whether the network's foundational assumptions were fragile. No one considered that simplicity could defeat sophistication. Overconfidence blinds, and blindness kills. Window teaches us that arrogance is the most expensive mistake of all, because it prevents adaptation until disaster forces it. By then,